Thanks everyone for coming. Something really important must have happened today, like Apple releasing a watch or something. Because we did get some RSVPs, but not as much shine. But really, thanks everyone for coming and supporting CleveSec. Without either CleveSec, we are a community-focused group trying to bring all of the other security groups in the greater Cleveland area together and collaborating and getting InfoSec spread across all of the world eventually. So, CleveSec does have simple rules. The first one is follow Wheaton's law, which if you don't know what it is or are familiar with it, is simply don't be a dick. Rule number 6, remember, which is rule number 2, don't take yourself so seriously. You know, in one end, don't be an ass to everyone else. On the other end, don't take yourself too seriously. We're here to have fun, to collaborate, to engage in meaningful conversations and to get to know each other on a deeper level rather than just, oh, I'm the security guy for such and such place. And number 3, which is our most interesting rule, is our Fight Club rule. If tonight is your first time in CleveSec, you have to come up here, say a few words, say who you are, where you're from, what interests you. Best if you say something that's outside of security, because obviously everyone's interested in security here. And something interesting about yourself. So, this is where CleveSec lives. We have our Twitter account and our hashtag. This is where we post most of our communication. We have the meetup page where you can sign up to RSVP for our events and to participate in discussions and polls that we post there. There's also where we post files that speakers will sometimes give us. If they give us their slides, we'll post them there. We have a LinkedIn group, which is it doesn't see much activity, but we do have it. So if you're in LinkedIn and you want to get into the LinkedIn group, you can find us there. And lastly, we have our CleveSec Gmail account, where you can send any message. If you don't want to post anything publicly on Twitter or anything like that, feel free to send any suggestions or questions to clevesec@gmail.com. We have our YouTube channel where we post our videos every month for the speaker meetings. And we have Patreon where individual people can sign up to give us a small amount of donations for, I think in our case it's set up for every time we post a video on the YouTube channel, which is just once per month. You can contribute X amount up to a maximum over a certain period of time. So that will help us out with being able to do more things in our community nights, especially if we want to do something cool that requires a special venue or special equipment or whatever. We can tap into the donations from Patreon to generate some cool community nights. And like I said already, but I want to stress, this is really a community effort. We have meetings like today where speakers come and talk. We also have community nights, which are just events that happen sort of outside the realm of security, where we just get together to do something fun. We've had a pub night already, we've had a movie night, and upcoming in September will be a lot sport night, where we'll go to Secure State, I believe, to play with Cleveland Lock Sports, Lock Village, Lockpick Village. So that'll be really cool. And so these meetings, the speaker meetings, happen every second Tuesday of the month, and the community night meetings happen every last Tuesday of the month. And lastly, on the community topic, please spread the word. We have our Twitter account already, and we have quite a bit of followers there, but we're trying to get ideas and ways to reach people who are not on Twitter yet, but are interested in security. So especially students who don't know where to find the resources, don't know who to contact. And if you have any suggestions or any contacts outside of Twitter who would help spread the word, please help us out. Here's tonight's agenda. We have From Pins to Patents by Schuyler Towne. He will give us a really comprehensive history of locks, and he's a very passionate speaker. I'm sure everyone will be interested in what he has to say. And Electronic Safe Fail with live demos by Jeff Popio, who will show us some common vulnerabilities in these plugins. With all that, it's time for our first timers to come up and say something. We have two. So, someone can volunteer, or I'll just speak at random. Alright, come on, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Eglin. Obviously, I'm interested in security, but other things that interest me are pretty much anything on the internet. I basically live on IRC and Twitter, and yeah, professionally, I'm a systems administrator for a manufacturing company here in Cleveland, and I enjoy doing pretty much anything to do with security, physical security, electronic security, info security, stuff like that. So, yeah, that's about it.
All right, thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jordan. I've worked at Island Software for 6 years now, and I'm just starting to move into the security.
All right. Cool, thanks very much. Jeff can introduce himself better when he comes up and speaks. And let me message Schuyler real quick to say that we're about ready. Which we are actually. So set this up and wait for the lag to catch up. Maybe he has a new link. He does have a new link. Okay, let's give him a preemptive round of applause. You can see it when he watches the recording. By the way, if you have any questions, you can live tweet him at Shoebox, and he will answer them at the end or reply to your tweets.
Hey everybody, one second. Okay. All right. Hey, everybody at CleveSec. Thanks so much for having me over digitally to talk box with you guys. Hope you're enjoying your box for tonight. And hey to anybody else out there it's viewing this. If you want to, the best way to shoot questions to me for after the talk is to hit me up on Twitter, at shoebox, like the thing that you would put your shoes in. There's a significant delay on the broadcast, so through the chat window or whatever else is going to be a little bit of a hassle, but I have the Twitter feed up on my tablet next to me, so I can try to answer some questions as we go along. So I'm Schuyler Towne. I have been picking locks for 8 years, and I've been studying the history of locks and the history of security in general for the past 3 to 4 years very seriously. Recently at CleveSec down in Virginia, a fantastic conference, I was given the opportunity to talk through sort of a mechanical engineering perspective on the history of security, taking us all the way back to some of the earliest known locks, right through to locks that we would see in hardware store locksmith's shop today. So today's talk is based on that talk, and it uses a decent amount of material from that, but I have focused it dramatically so that I can really dig into some of the core content and really establish a lot of the connections between ideas that have been going on for thousands of years. So we're going to dive right in. I'm going to share some of my slides and switch back and forth. And I think this is my first time doing a streamed talk in years, so we'll see if this is any good. Hope you guys enjoy it. Alright, so we're going to look at 2 different branches of the evolution of the lock. We're going to have a look at some of the basic ideas in Roman locks, and we're going to take a look at the Mesopotamian one, by which we got some other very interesting locks. So just stepping back real quick to this first image, what you're seeing is a deadbolt. We have this long stick, which is acting as the key. So the key for these Roman locks really was just a stick, bent and passing through this hole in the door. It would be exactly long enough to dip into the small serrations that you see in the bolt there, and then shove them back and forth in order to lock or unlock the door. So it's a very simple idea. You see the primary door unit on the left, and then the third staple going all the way on the right is what the bolt would actually slide into. So on the left it's locked, on the right it's unlocked, dead, simple. Okay. So we're also going to have a look at Mesopotamian locks. Mesopotamian locks started with this Mesopotamian door seal. It's a very simple idea that just had a single bolt going through this clay seal, and the bolt would hold the door locked, and the seal would protect it from being unlocked, though really to unlock you just have to destroy the seal. But being that it's a seal, it lets you know at least that it's been open. So we'll see how both of these evolve and create some blocks we have today. So going back to that Roman idea, one of the very first things that we're going to see routinely throughout this talk is people changing up the form factor. As a matter of fact, we're going to see 3 things pretty commonly. We're going to see changes to the form factor. We're going to see changes to prevent the tentative method of lockpicking, which we'll explain in depth in a minute. And lastly, we'll just see people adding more pins, adding more levers, whatever the case may be. So those 3 ideas pop up over and over again throughout history. Changing the form factor, usually to make it smaller. Changing the workings of the lock itself, or adding security features to be the tentative method. And if a couple of tumblers is a good thing, probably adding 30 more is going to be a great thing, so you see a lot of people just adding more. So, as we go along, we'll see a lot of that. So, the very first thing we're going to look at is just the form factor being really the Roman key, that big stick, that big bent stick, is actually mentioned in the Bible and a lot of old writing. They would talk about people walking around with their keys slung over their shoulders because they were so big. And keys were also a mark of authority and power. As a matter of fact, Athena, despite having the name of the city of Athens, was also given a key to the city slung over her shoulder. So they're massive keys, they're super impractical, and honestly, just looking at them, you can get a good sense of how to make your own. Not that there was a lot of amateur metalworking back then. So being that these huge keys are unwieldy, we start seeing dramatically smaller keys that still operate directly on the bolt. So with this small key, which is from the 8th century AD, and it's part of the Towne collection at the Stanford Museum, the small tab at the end of the key, that bit, will just operate directly on the bolt, slipping it back and forth, into and out of the body of the lock, or the door, or the case may be. However, those sorts of flat keys are really easy to duplicate. So we very quickly start to see some different profiles cut into the keyway. However, whether it's a block of wood or a piece of metal, or eventually, we'll see more and more elaborate keyways as we go along. But keyways come pretty early, different shapes for the face of the key to fit into the lock. And going to the other side, we're interacting directly on the bolt, creating this really elaborate warding. So the way the word lock works is very simple. If we look at this lock here, this key, we'll see that all of these tacks that are cut through the key, very elaborate warding. On the inside of the lock, we're actually just going to see the opposite of that. So for every zig and zag and crossing angle, we will see that reproduced in metal on the interior of the lock. So having those slate blockages prevents our access to the bolt if we don't have the correct key. And so we see more and more elaborate wardings. And in this case, we're looking specifically at a paracentric line. And what that means is that the different lines cut through the key make it so that you can't draw a straight line from one side of the key across the other. They break the center line. They're going back and forth. You'll see this concept pop up quite a bit as well. So the problem with all of this, though, is that the entire concept is going to be doomed. Despite that, it manages to persist for thousands of years. So what we're about to look at is the birth of the lever lock. But here's the reason the word lock is doomed from the start. Even if you have incredibly elaborate wardings like that brief paracentric key you're just looking at, you're still going to have an easy job in freshening the key. And what I mean by this is that if you put a blank piece of metal, a blank flat piece of metal, into the lock, and you apply just a little bit of wax to that, and begin rotating your blank key in the lock, you'll stop eventually, right? Eventually the warding will catch the key and won't go any further. When you pull it out, you'll see imprinted in the wax exactly where you need to cut. So you remove that material, you put it back in, a little more wax, you turn until you get another mark in it. And as you're building up these marks and removing them from the key, you're actually creating a perfect key that will always work in that lock. And warded locks across the board were doomed to fail by that attack. And that's called the wax pad attack. So, in a direct challenge to the wax pad attack, we have the first lever lock. So this is a simple bearing lever lock, and it works in a really simple way. Looking at this head on, we have a big leaf spring up toward the top. Now that leaf spring has a small peg that is pushing down into a notch in the bolt. If we look a little bit over to the right, we'll see another empty notch. And this, really, just this very simple two-notch system is the birth of most of modern security when it comes to locks. So, if we're looking at the bolt now correctly, we see that there is a path that it can slide along. And behind the bolt, we'll see another small piece of metal. And that small piece of metal is going to push up on that spring. And then the key will still act on the bolt directly, and it will drag the bolt out of the casing of the lock. In this case, which is to say that it will lock it. And then the key will release the bar of metal behind the bolt, and that notch will be filled by the low tab on our leaf spring. And that's it. It just drags that notch from one position to the other by sliding the bolt along. And pushes that notch out of the way. We have a lever. And that lever is our first real tone. So the lever is really interesting because even though it potentially defeats the wax pad attack, it introduces a whole new arena of attacks. It's actually really simple to defeat. The very first bearing lever, the bearing lever lock, is what we call a single acting tone. So in the case of a single acting tone, we literally just have to lift it high enough just push it in one direction far enough, and we can manipulate the bolt to our heart's content. So if we get in there with a little piece of wire or a bent piece of metal, whatever the case may be, and we lift up that lever, it doesn't matter how high we're pushing it upwards. With another piece of wire, we can flip that bolt back and forth to our heart's content. Really, really easy. So it's actually not a big leap in security, but it is the birthplace of some really interesting ideas. So from the single acting lever, we then move to the closed lever. So like I said, the single acting lever is particularly secure. So we start seeing these closed levers where the levers have to be lifted up high enough, but if you attempt to lift them too high, they'll stop dead, stop completely, and won't be able to move any further. Now, this sort of makes it a double-acting situation, because you can't lift too low and you can't lift too high, but it also reintroduces the problem of impression. Because by lifting up on that lever, as soon as your key stops, you just remove a little bit of the material from wherever it stopped. And then you try to lift it again. And assuming that it still doesn't go, you remove a little more and a little more until your key can turn completely. And now you've cut down the key to the correct depth for that lever. So, we move on to the enclosed lever. And this H shape is a real leap in the security of the key response. So, your lever, your post of the bolt that will allow it to slide back and forth, is sitting on one side of this, and then you have to lift it up exactly high enough in order for that bolt to then be able to slide between the two enclosed sections. So if you lift it too high, it won't work. If you lift it too low, it won't work. Cool, makes sense. However, we're going to see a major shift in lever locks. And we still see a lot of enclosed levers today, but in order to fit them into padlocks and smaller pieces, we have the form factor problem. And thus, we start seeing levers shaped like this. So these levers are pivoting from the far right. Each of them have their own little leaf spring there. They're pressing against the bar marked 64. And then over on the left, you'll see the gate marked 50 are now along the edge of the lever. They're on the face of the lever. And when the key is inserted into the lock, it will slide along that big curve in the levers that we call the belly of the lever. It will lift each of them up to different heights, and if they're lifted too low, the post, 52, can't get pulled into the lever. If they're lifted too high, it can't get pulled into the lever, since they all have to be lifted to exactly the same amount. But in this new open idea, they don't have to be quite as large, and they can fit into some very small places. So now it's time to talk about the tentative method. The tentative method is what you know of lockpicking. It is the way to pick a lock. So by applying a little bit of pressure to the system, by beginning to slide the bolt, again with a piece of wire acting directly on the bolt, we can pull that post against the face of the levers. So we have our small post pulling against the face of the lever. We have our gate here, as represented by my little long crossbar. So if we're not yet lifting high enough on the lever, we're just pressing the post in the face of the lever. Now, as we keep that pressure applied, we'll keep pressing, and then when we get in and apply another wire to our lever, lifting that up, we will slide up and up and up and up and up, and eventually we will feel, as the post goes free, it isn't grinding anymore, it's hit our gate. So, that's the entire idea behind the tentative method, and it's the same idea by which you pick and double locks. And anything else, you guys are having your lock support day, you're going to use the tentative method on probably everything that you work on. A little bit of pressure, and then manipulating the tumblers. Put pressure on the system, manipulate the tumblers. Doesn't matter if it's a lever tumbler, a disc tumbler, a pin tumbler, it all works the same way. Interestingly, tentative method linguistically appears to go back to the tentative process, which was attributed to Isaac Newton, and was the birth of the scientific method. So he describes a tentative process by which he tries an idea, allows it to fail, and then iterates on his failure. And so, when we apply pressure to the system, and we attempt a tumbler, and and we get nothing out of it, fine, but we may learn a little bit of something, we move on, we test another, lift a little higher, change up our attempt. That method of rapid failure and iteration is the 10-minute method. And linguistically, it goes back to sort of the work of the scientific method, which is cool. Probably not really here, there, during the rest of the talk, but in order to defend against this 10-minute method, which is incredibly powerful to the point that we first start seeing the 10-minute method appearing in the late 1700s, and we are still using it today to defeat almost every single key-based lock on the market. So, to begin defeating that, we start seeing some new additions to our locks. In particular, serrations. So, here we have our lever tumbler with gears above the sweep, that can be called the belly, and we have our spring above it and our gate. And then right below the gate on the right, you'll see that we have a series of small notches cut out. These are our serrations. So that when we are lifting that lever upward to try it against the post will actually catch in those little serrations. And the posts in lever locks will often be barbed as well, so that they will catch the serrations really tightly and make it very difficult to find the correct gate. And this can even go a dramatic step further. In 1811, I believe, we are introduced to Chubb's detector lock, the Chubb Brothers detector lock. Now, other people had detector locks before this, and the idea of the detector lock is pretty straightforward. When you are picking the lock, it will detect the fact that it's being picked. In the case of most of the lever-based detector locks, you would have to lift one of the levers too high, at which point the detector mechanism would snap into place and it would prevent you from manipulating any of the levers again. So in this case, we're going to look at letter C, that post extending through a gap in all of the levers is the punishing detector mechanism. So that when you lift one of the levers too high, it will push that post, which will release another sprung element, which will lock into the notch cut out at the top of the levers and prevent you from from pivoting the levers anymore. Now, like I said, there have been detector locks before the Chubb. The Chubb is particularly famous because of that key over on the right. That would reset the detector mechanism without you having to destroy the lock. Previously, if the picking attempt was taken on your detected lock, it would lock it down tight and you wouldn't be able to release it non-destructively. So the Chubb lock brought this detector mechanism sort of to the masses in a very practical way. And Chubb locks are still sold to this day. However, in the Great Lock Controversy of 1851, which of course is one of my favorite topics of research, it was proved that the 10-minute method can still be used very effectively against Chubb's detected locks. Because you can pick them in reverse by using the opposite key, what Rama, what Alfred Hobbs did was that he used the detector mechanism to intentionally fire. Basically, he would lift a lever until it set off the detector mechanism, and then he would know that it had been picked too high, and he would make a note of that, and he would pick it in reverse in order to reset the detector mechanism, and then he would go to work on the next one, he would lift it until it went too high, and boom. And what he realized was that he could just use the detector mechanism against itself, because he could pick the other one with the 10-minute method. He could pick it to working again with the 10-minute method, and then he could just decode it using the detector, which is amazing. It's a super cool attack. Okay, so from here, we're going to look at one of the two beautiful French locks that we're going to look at. This is the Shape 150, and this is the idea of just adding more. So, and it's also actually the idea of the form factors as well. So this is a very small lock on the scale of lever locks. The Ingersoll makes a really nice compact lever lock for a normal mortise door, and the Shape 150 brings this even tighter. And the way that this works is that the key that you see in the foreground, with its I-beam shape, has 4 rows of cuts. And each of those rows operates on a different set of levers inside the lock. And here on the face of it, we're seeing two of those sides. So the levers will pivot from each extreme end of the housing of the lock, and when they have arrived at the correct position, each of their gates will align with the large gap that is cut through all of them, and then the two big holes that you see on the side of the lock will contain a sidebar. And we'll look a little more at sidebars when we get to medicos in a minute. The sidebar will just be a long bar of metal that, when all of the gaps were open, would act just like the post and slide into the aligned gates. So this had 10 levers working independently in sets of 3 and 2 across 4 axes of the key. It's a very cool lock and significantly high security. It had its own problems, of course. It was pickable and it could be defeated destructively as well. They're beautiful locks that actually entered the American market for a little while. You will see them being advertised in Popular Mechanics right alongside the Norman lock, which is just an incredible mind-blowing lock that I believe I recently decided to eventually get tattooed on me. But recently is, and I said that to my fiance yesterday, so it might never happen, so I wouldn't be able to run that. Anyway, so it's just very cool, and while you certainly can't say anything like it's the logical conclusion of the lever lock, it does bring that form factor down to a tiny space, and it adds just a silly number of levers, and additionally has false gate serrations on them. So it brings together a lot of the things that we've talked about in the first branch of our evolution of the lock into one beautiful little cylinder. The Fichet company in general is one of my favorite producers of locks. Alright, so let's dive in now to the Mesopotamian round. And don't forget, as we're going along, you should feel free to shoot questions that you have over to @shoebox on Twitter, keeping an eyeball on them as they potentially come in. But I want to keep proceeding with the talks as I go too. Okay, so Mesopotamian locks. Now, Mesopotamian locks have been known as Egyptian locks for the past 200 years. I am working to correct that by calling them Mesopotamian lock. While I've spoken a lot about it and written about it casually, I really need to publish a paper about this research, but you can see it in various parts that I've done. Anyway, just bear with me that these began in Mesopotamia, and this, the Mesopotamian door seal, is the mechanical precursor to the lock that is on your door right now. So, it should hold an important place in your hearts if you care anything about that locks, which I assume you're watching this video. So, the Mesopotamian door seal, as I was saying before, is a clay tablet secured around a piece of wood that acts as a stopper for a door sliding. The way that it's actually strung up in the back involves some rope and whatnot. It's a little bit more elaborate than what I'm describing. But the important thing is that bar in the metal is called the signature. And that's a modern transliteration of a cuneiform word. But that second linguistically got moved to a much more complex lock. So, this is a regular go-to image for the Egyptian lock. But each of those pegs, when you look at linguistic record in Mesopotamian security sphere, are called second. So we have this linguistic evolution from the door seal to the first key lock. And it implies a mechanical evolution between the two as well. So this well predates the Roman lock also. The timeline that we're looking at for the creation of the first key-based lock is somewhere between 1800 BCE and 2500 BCE. So we, with the Egyptian lock, or the Mesopotamian lock, we see the first gasp of a pin-tumbler system. Each of those pegs enters the bolt directly, and they're each the same length. And then your key, which will have 3 small protrusions, which match the spacing of those pegs, will actually enter the bolt directly, lift the pins out of it, and then pull the bolt out. So the keys in this case certainly have in common with the Roman lock, that they act directly on the bolt, which is one of the first real evolutions that we see. I just want to talk about that really quick, because the idea of separating the key from acting on the bolt directly provides a very rich layer of security. So as long as we're always operating on the bolt directly, we're pretty much always opening ourselves up to relatively direct manipulation. If we can access the bolt directly with a key, we can definitely access the bolt directly with a tool meant to emulate the key. And when we can access the bolt directly, and that bolt is going to act on our tumblers, we can always apply the 10-minute method, right? So what we're showing you here can still, is still subject to the 10-minute method, but just the idea of separating the key from the bolt, the locking idea from the bolt, creates a massive new layer of security possibilities. So, here we have our key in the middle of the frame, entering into these, what we might now call sliders instead of normal conductors. Because the key is actually going through the middle of these tumblers. The bottom portion is attached to the upper portion, and we're just moving through a notch. So this slider idea, we'll see later on in Joseph Brahma, but I think there's a really strong argument to be made for him coming up with the idea on his own, as there hadn't been much reintroduction to this idea before he started making his laws. So now the bottom of these sliders are interacting with the bolt. The key will interact only with the sliders, and then we pull the bolt out separately of the whole system. Now, around the end of the 18th century, 1798, we have William Etten writing his survey of the Ottoman Empire, and he's actually seeing Turkish locks that are the modern-day ancestor of the Egyptian blocks, the Mesopotamian blocks. And he was kind of a dick. He, in looking at blocks, said this idea might be improved on, but the Turks never make it. So his survey of the Ottoman Empire began to reintroduce the idea of the pin-tumbler lock to Europe. And as you can see by the very fact that we're still seeing them in 1798, this lock has persisted. As a matter of fact, you'll see it showing up in different parts of the world. Clearly, I think originally having propagated from Mesopotamia, but through Egypt, Rome, and as Rome conquered, they brought the pin-tumbler lock idea with them as well. And so in the 18th century, the examples of this lock were all over the place. But it hadn't really been in the European consciousness until William Etten came back and published a survey of the Ottoman Empire. But even then, it didn't really capture anybody's imagination until the fellow on the left, Denton, was traveling with Napoleon's army in Egypt. Napoleon was attempting to conquer Egypt around the same time that Denton was doing his survey. This went poorly for Napoleon again, but he was also on a mission of cultural loot, basically. So he brought together his correspondence, of which Denton was one. And Denton actually separated from the rest of the army, the rest of the correspondence, in order to chase after this guerrilla pharaoh they heading up into northern Egypt. And the reason that he wanted to do this was because, well, there was some knowledge of southern Egypt and the areas that Napoleon was going to conquer. Northern Egypt was, there wasn't a lot of information there, not a lot of information available to Europeans there. So he went into northern Egypt chasing after Morad Bey, and came across this temple at Karnak. And at Karnak, he drew an illustration. No, sorry, he didn't draw the illustration. That's kind of the biggest pain in my head in this series. At Karnak, he observes on the wall a carving of the lock that he's seeing all around him. This is the lock that was described by Etten. So, looking at this lock, he says, man, isn't this cool? That such a utilitarian object could survive these many years in the revolution of nations. When he put together his little speech about it, and he wrote up his journal's protection degree. So he brought knowledge of this and a ton of illustrations of clothing that he was seeing locally, other carvings of walls stacking on the block, and he brought these back to Europe, and they were published and then translated into English in 3 volumes. His journals of his travels with Napoleon in Egypt. So, Egyptian lock, as it was being known at the time, sparked this sort of fever of new invention. And already in England, we had this fantastic push for new security ideas, especially when it came to locks. Anyway, you can hear all about all that in any of my 1851 talks, but let's dig back into the practical results of this period. So, one of the very first things that we see is that the massive form factor of the Egyptian locks starts to get played with by the European and eventually American inventors. And one of the big things is that the nature of sliding that bolt just takes up a lot of space. Now, Langsdale Sr. would eventually make some sliding bolt or sliding plug locks, but Abraham Ogier, I don't know how to pronounce that, Stansbury, who has the first patent on Egyptian slide lock, and Langsdale Jr., of course, along with many others attempting to do some work in that space, were creating rotating ideas where the locks would actually turn so that the action of opening, of unlocking of the key would all take place in the same area, and nothing would have to be slid out of the way. So eventually, Langsdale Jr. puts together the modern version of the lock, which we see in this famous patent. And we start seeing keys that much more clearly resemble your own. And again, this is still, this solves another problem as well. As it says at the top of the slide, if it locks the door sucks. So when the Mesopotamians or the Egyptians or the Romans, or, even to this day, folks like the Bamani of Mali, the Dogon of Mali, who to this day they can't have the locks of their houses. When they were making the locks, they had to fit them specifically to the door. So, one of Langsdale Jr.'s other big breakthroughs was taking all this work that had been done by his father, by Stansbury, by others playing with the pictorial concept, and he said, okay, isn't this great that we have been able to separate the action of the key from the action of the bolt? The key is just going to unlock the basic mechanism, and then the bolt will follow along. That's amazing that we've been able to do that. Not only does that provide us another layer of security engineering, but it also allows us an incredible amount of standardization. So what Langsdale Jr. started doing was creating one format of his cylinder. And he would create the lock, and he would make the keys that fit in the lock. And then on the back of the lock, he put something that's called the cam. Now the cam would become the universal member that would interact with every bolt. And so the cam would fit into the latch of the bolt and it would slide it back and forth. But it would only do that when the key had been able to successfully rotate. So Langsdale Jr. was able to take, this long history of people cobbling together individual solutions for individual doors. And don't get me wrong, he was far from the first to apply mass production techniques to security, but the reason that the lock on your door is a pin-color lock is probably because he so successfully solved this format problem, this split pin problem, where all of the door manufacturers, all of the architects, all of the people making hardware could start building solutions around his one model. And then any lock that you bought from him or any of his competitors that entered the market could all fit the same doors. It's a huge moment. Anyway, so this is how you wound up with a lock on your door based on this lock from 4,000-ish years ago. So, sorry, just where this slides. I'll get quicker at this. We also, at first, just have open keyways, where it is just flat steel. Now, if we remember way back to the start of the talk of the Roman locks that were flat, that's very easy to reproduce, very easy to get tools in there, and thus we start seeing these shaped keys. And the first patents we're going to refer to as corrugated keys. And we see corrugated keys around 1880s, and it's one of the last big innovations in the core concept of the pin-tunnel lock that we'll see for a very long time. So again, the 10-minute method will work against pin-tunnel locks fine. As a matter of fact, you watching this, especially the new person at CleveSec, should know that, because you're all about to go pick a bunch of pins from the locks. So the tentative method works fine. We start to rotate the plug of the lock that presses on the tumblers in our lock. We press up on the tumblers until we feel them catch on what we now call the shear line. And when they're all caught in the right place, they'll rotate freely. Boom, tentative method works great. So, once again, just like in the lever lock history, we start to see some solutions to the tentative method problem. And just like in the lever lock history, thousands of years ago, we start to see more elaborate workings, these paracentric workings. And clarify a little bit. In the history of the lever locks, paracentric workings, you start seeing more in the like 14 through 1600s. But still far predating the pin-tumble locks, so you can see where they get their inspiration from. However, the tentative method still works against this, so we start modifying the pins, applying serrations to our pins. Again, in the history of the lever lock development, we definitely saw that, 100 years ago, or a little less than that. So, serrations on the pins provide the same function as serrations on the lever tumblers, and they really cause a lot of problems for pickers, but these locks can still be picked. Tentative method is a super strong technique. So, just like we had the chip detector lock, we start to see locks with track pins. Now, what we're looking at here is actually just a way of converting a very basic pin tumbler lock into a lock that contains track pins. It's a little difficult to explain without a lot more pictures than this, but what you're seeing on the bottom are what are called construction keying holes. Those are there in order to, it provides a single change of the key when you have built a series of houses for construction, and the first time the user operates their key, some ball bearings or some power will be shifted, dropped into those holes, and now the construction workers will be able to move again. So we're making use of these construction keys and some old Schlage F-series T-pins to create a track pin system in a normal pin tumble lock. Which is a technique that I learned from Zeke 79 on Lock 101 like 6 years ago. Shout out to Zeke, you're awesome. You were one of my first business teachers. Cool. But pin tumbler trap pins, for the most part, act just like the early detector locks, where once the plug is trapped, it'll have to be constructively opened. But it can still be very important for some higher security situations. And for the person that arrives attempting to non-destructively open a lock, having suddenly switched to destructive entry might foil them completely if they haven't come prepared to do both needs. So it's definitely a strong new mechanism, but they can definitely still be potentially defeated if you're really clever about how you're doing your work. Alright, so still attempting to defeat the tentative method, we start to see something called Lafayette locks. And many of you may have seen a very modern Lafayette lock recently with the Forever lock picture over on the right. But we see patents for these very early on. The one on the left here, made by Linus Yale, is not even the earliest. And I very excitedly have right here in front of me the earliest Lafayette style lock ever made. So this is a Heron lock. The patent for it was 1848. It was later reissued in, I believe, 52, but this is from the 48 patent. And amazingly, it is a cutaway, so you can actually see the tumblers. And when you look on the inside of it, it's also painted. And I covered this in one of the videos on the YouTube channel. But this is a salesman's sample of the first ever Lafayette style lock. So this is how it works. This is the key for the lock, these little pegs. And we're going to slide this in this little slot above the handle. And as we press this in, you can see, sorry, let me get that settled. Oh, it's so finicky. There we go. As we press that in, you can see the levers sliding into position. And then we're actually going to start to close the handles. As we close that slot, we no longer have access to the key whatsoever. So the whole idea behind this locking concept is that you put the key in the lock, and then the interior components of the lock hold the key in place or put the key into the right position and then attempt to drop the bolt. So you can't get in there and tension something and manipulate it like you would with normal tether method. It completely cuts off your access to the levers before the bolt is able to act on the levers. So now the bolt is able to come in, and we come all the way back around with the spare key right back out for us. This was clearly being sold by somebody that didn't 100% know what they had on their hands, so I got it very affordably considering what it was, and it is my favorite locking mechanism. So, Lafayette locks are super cool, and they're cool to the point that they keep coming up. And when I started seeing covered in Gizmodo and Boing Boing and all the hell over Twitter and everywhere else, the Forever Lock, this I believe Taiwanese or Japanese bike lock that let's show you a picture of again. So the idea here is very similar. This, all of the red bits there, the part that's slid out to the right, opens up a channel for you to stick your key in. The key is a little silvery bit with sort of a notch taken out of it there. And that slides in like you would shut a torpedo into a hole. And then you rotate, close the red part into the other red part, and then rotate again, and that key is brought into the right position to open up the bolt. Sorry, not the bolt, but the U-shaft. Okay, so this is all well and good, except that Ollie Dietrichson, Ollie, please forgive me, I'm trying to get your name completely wrong. But Ollie, one of the amazing pickers that I've had the opportunity to meet up in Germany, actually put a YouTube video up of him bumping this. He made a bump key out of one of the keys for the system, and then he notched it in place and then whacked on the actual end of the lock, and it held it in place for him perfectly and allowed him to bump it open. So even these Lafayette style locks, which completely take the key and the tumblers away from you, can still potentially be manipulated. It's a super, super clever attack. Okay, so Lafayette style locks remain very, very cool though, and it was neat seeing some new ones pop up, and it gave me an excuse to yap at a bunch of people about history, which is always my favorite. So in addition to all of this, we have secondary locking methods. So if you're attempting to create a higher security system, you always want to build in additional layers. So this idea of secondary locking mechanisms initially just takes the form, just like it did with lever locks, of adding more tunnels, right? So you add more pins in here. So this is a DOM in the IX series, probably an IX10, I think. Actually, a belt buckle of the DOM IX10 key. And this just provides 2 rows of pins, which creates a big problem. There are a lot of other beautiful things about this idea of a lock. Let's keep on moving along. So we also have what are called cruciform locks. Instead of 2 rows of pins, we have 3 or 4 rows of pins in across. Now, interestingly, before the inline pin tumbler lock was invented, Linus Yale Sr. was initially playing around with cruciform locks. Now, in his locks, he would only wind up having 4 pins, but a lot of modern cruciform locks can have, 16 pins without too much hassle. And then, if you want to have the most pins, just look at anything that Kava is doing, K-A-V-A. This is the Kava Star, which has, I think 6 racks of possible pin placements, 20-something potential pins. Not every single chamber can be filled in every single configuration, but regardless, the number of possible pins to put in this thing, the number of key differs is just astronomical. Absolutely absurd. So, adding all these pins is all well and good, but we can definitely still take them. In fact, the more pins you add to the system, particularly in the case of things that not only are adding a large number of pins, but also still want to fit into the same footprint. If you think about a normal pin tumbler lock, a normal pin tumbler key, the cuts in the key correspond to the length of the pins, right? So if you have a really deep cut, followed by a really shallow cut. That's a really long pin, followed by a really shallow pin. Cool. normal pin tumbler lock, the amount of variation from one pin to another pin is very, very small, because there just isn't enough room to have the larger variations that we get on normal inline pin tumbler locks. And therefore, they can actually be raked a lot easier than normal inline pin tumbler locks. So the tentative method will keep blasting through just about anything you throw at it. But there are some more novel ideas in here as well. So, we're looking now at Medico. Medico had this idea of having the pins rotate. The way that this works is that the pins, which you can see illustrated in the lower right-hand corner here, have a chiseled tip. And then the key, which we see dead in the middle over on the right. The cuts of the key, instead of being straight across, are cut to different angles. And the different angles that the pins are cut to correspond to a gap cut out of the side of the pin. Now, we've seen gaps like this before when we're looking at the sidebar on the Shade 450, when we're looking at just the way the lever locks work in general. And here, Medico is now introducing the concept of the sidebar to pin tumbler locks by cutting a gash out the side, cutting gates into the side, so that when the pins are lifted and rotated by the key, each of those gates are facing the same direction, and a bar of metal, a sidebar, just like in the Shade 450, which in this case we see basically right in front of us, down toward the bottom of the lock. This bar metal running all the way across the cutaway, that's our sidebar. So when the key is fully inserted, all the pins are lifted to the correct height so that the plug can rotate with the normal so the plug can still rotate as normal with the shear line there. And the sidebar also has to drop in order for the plug to rotate and the sidebar to pull out of the helm of the lock. However, the tentative method does something really interesting here. So the whole idea behind the tentative method is that we're applying pressure to the system and then manipulating the elements of the system. So in systems that actually add secondary locking mechanisms that are divorced in some way from the primary locking mechanism, in this case we have rotation divorced from height. So the pins have to be lifted to the correct height to solve that locking problem. It doesn't matter if they're rotated in the right direction to solve it. Similarly, they have to be rotated in the correct direction to solve the sidebar, but it doesn't matter what the height is. There are exceptions to this, but in the classic Medico, this is the case. So when you apply pressure to that system, the whole reason the tentative method works is that nothing is actually perfect. And so when you're applying pressure to one thing, another thing isn't quite yet binding. But you just deal with the one that's binding. When that one moves, now you're hitting another one. And you find that one, when that moves, you go in a little bit, you're hitting another one, so on and so forth. Well, the same idea applies on a larger level if you think about separating this rotation from the lifting. So I learned this from John King, J.K. C.J., who created the Medico, and I got to do some work with him on the disclosure of that and publishing some stuff about that. And he was the one that really introduced me to this idea that you can just attack one of these mechanisms at a time, and the slop between the two mechanisms means that you can manipulate just the heights, and then when that's all in order, the lock will turn a certain amount and now it will engage the sidebar. And now you can work on the rotations until the sidebar locks in. Or, if you're rotating in the opposite direction, do all of your rotations lock the sidebar in, and it will hold them in place while you now deal with the height manipulation. So this is still very hard. This is not an easy thing to carry out, but it gives us a method of attacking. The tentative method provides us a means of circumventing even these higher security ideas. So, we then have this amazing little lock, the M-part interlocking cylinder. And I do a video on this in the various conviction series as well. But the basic idea, if you look all the way up to the rightmost pin stand in the right picture, what we see is that the key pin, the pin on top, and the driver pin, the pin on the bottom, are actually interlocking with one another. They're linked together. And as a result of being linked together, you have to both lift them to the correct height and rotate them at once. You can't separate those ideas anymore. They have to be both lifted and rotated in order for them to turn even a slight bit. And so, the template method still applies here. We can still attack this lock, we can still pick this lock. I personally have never picked one, but I know people who have. But it makes it dramatically harder. And it's just a great evolution of the previous. Okay, so then Linus Yellow Jr. comes along, and in the aftermath of the Great Law Controversy of 1851, and a lot of other stuff we see is going on, he comes out and says something painfully flowery, but the gist of it is, any lock that can be opened by a key can be picked. Basically, if you can get a key in there, we can carry out the 10th method on this. We can find a way to manipulate it and open it. So he starts turning his attention, and a lot of other people have the same idea and start turning their attention to combination locks. They're being called at the time permutation locks. And there are a lot of these out there. I'm going to very quickly knock off the sesame lock you're seeing on the left. And I don't have a great name for this, but ever since that Dan Brown book came out, I've been calling it the cryptex lock, because he calls them cryptex in that book. Seems like a decent name for it. Where the tumblers spin around the interior locking mechanism. So the problem with both of these is they can be really easily brute forced, and they can be really easily decoded. So, remember our sidebar? Well, we're going to reintroduce the sidebar, but now we're going to call it the fence, and we're going to build in a bunch of gates to our system. So because we can manipulate each of the individual tumblers in our other permutation locks, because we can manipulate those directly, put our fingers on them and twist and go, brute forcing them is a very fast affair. Really easy, even if you have 4 weeks, even if you have 5 minutes, comparatively to brute forcing your way through any other lock you have to deal with different tools and whatnot, because you can just use your fingers, super easy, super fast. So what we're looking at in this slide is these 2 little bits of silver metal, you can see right in the middle, that are sandwiched between the brass discs. Those are called flies. The whole idea behind fly is that you are only manipulating the backmost wheel in your combination lock. So you're manipulating the back wheel, and then it has a small peg of metal. And that small peg of metal interacts with a small peg of metal in the next disc. And it, as you rotate it, picks up the next disc and begins rotating that. And that has a little peg, and that manipulates the next one, and so on and so forth. And this is the reason that when you're dialing in your locker combination, you have to rotate however many times in one direction, and then one fewer time in the other direction. Because you're picking up from the back wheel, and then you're rotating until the front wheel is in its correct position. And then you start rotating the back wheel in the opposite direction, pick up the next wheel, pick up the next wheel, the exact way where it needs to be, and then do it 1 fewer times, and then with the wheel that you're directly manipulating, you don't pass go again for that. So that's how those work. But we come up with some interesting methods. Oops, sorry. We come up with some interesting methods to attack these as well. So the problem here is that it's really easy to feel where the fence interacts with the gates and the wheels. So we're just trying to line all the gates up and the wheels, and the fence can drop into it. But if the fence is acting on that directly, it's really easy to feel where each of those gates are, and we can very quickly determine what the combination should be. So we add the nose, which is the big protrusion off of the fence, pushing down into the gap of the what we call the cam wheel. That's the one you're manipulating directly. So that's all well and good, but then we come up with the micrometer attack. The micrometer attack is really cool. What they're doing is testing the distance between feeling a tap on the right side of that nose and the left side of that nose. Just testing that over and over again as you rotate all the wheels and turns. Really cool attack. Read a great paper about it by Matt Glaze at crypto.org called Safe Cracking for the Computer Scientist. It goes into this in depth. And so there are ways to combat this though, because what this is doing is trying to align all of the tumblers and then feel the back. So one of the ways to defeat this is to create all on wheels. So the fence is lifted up a little bit higher and a little bit lower, depending on which of those slightly ovoid wheels is manipulating the fence at the time. That makes it really hard to feel what's going on there, and dramatically extends the time for micrometer attack phase. ball bearing, the top and the back of the clock, so that every position you turn makes a loud clicking noise, and you feel the vibration of it as well. Makes it very difficult to measure the distance between the gate on the cam wheel and the nose. And then Sargent came along with the magnetic fence, and this thing is super cool. The basic idea is that the big red painted job on the top has a significant magnet behind it, and the fence with nose attached will actually be stuck to the magnet most of the time, but every 360 degrees, once it gets 360 degrees, the connection between the magnet and the fence will be broken, so the fence can potentially drop into place if it has been put in the right position, and if it hasn't, it gets lifted right back up to the magnet and held in place, so you can't feel anything except for that one moment of each rotation when it drops. And Sargent claimed, and I haven't seen anybody who's combated this claim, that with this invention, he managed to completely defeat the micrometer attack. However, you don't really see it around anymore because there are all sorts of other problems that magnets cause and all sorts of other ways to potentially defeat or change magnets. That said, a really cool idea to tackle a really specific problem and incredibly successful at what it did. Alright, so I'm definitely running low on the amount of time that I paid for this. I'm going to go quickly through this next little batch about alloy locks and containers in general. But what if we want to make this really small and add a key back into the system that we said we were making so we wouldn't have a key? Well, then you would have the alloy invented in the very early 1900s, maybe 1900s, maybe 1910s by a gentleman from Finland whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce right now. That became known as the Alloy Company, and this container locks proliferated through there. That said, the amazing gray man who published encyclopedic high-security locks, encyclopedic high-security locks, and when that's an amazing book, he potentially thought since then maybe the German subs came first, and Finland got that. However, the tentative method works just fine against these as well, because the way that these work is that the bar of metal, the side bar that we see on the top, is drawn into the gaps in the discs by applying a little bit of pressure to the plug of the lock. And you can apply that pressure with a small tool, manipulating what's called the zero disc, which hits the sidebar and starts trying in place, so it hits that zero disc, and then you can manipulate each of the individual discs with the tentative method. However, alloy, in its most logical conclusion, this is a picture of the alloy Protect. The alloy Protect has, since that last previous talk, been provably picked with tools, and so while I said they solved it here, it's instead been solved again in Protect 2. The whole idea behind this is that the basis of the tentative method is that when you apply pressure to the system, you then manipulate the tumbler. So, Protect, what Alloy set out to do with Protect and Protect 2 is that they created a system with their return bars, so that when you apply pressure to the system, you can no longer manipulate the tumblers. You're free to manipulate the tumblers and then apply tension to them, but at that point, you're just brute forcing, and making tools to brute force that sort of lock is just your playing point. So by separating tension from manipulation, that's the holy grail of defeating the tentative method, and they achieved it so far with the Protect 2. We'll see what its future looks like. The Protect 1 has been around for a long time before being brutally defeated. Alright, let's dig into the last section here, and then I will attempt to answer a couple of questions, and then I will go have dinner. Okay, so even with a system where you can manipulate, where you can separate tension from manipulation, the keys are still basic mechanical keys, and it is incredibly easy to duplicate. Even if it's a crazy looking key, it becomes really easy. You can get a blank for it and mail into it. You can potentially make an impression of it with some play, whatever the case may be. But it's easy to duplicate keys. So, one of the first ways people attempt to protect themselves against this is by finding patents for the keys. So, the Schuyler is patented, sure, but only 4 of those patents on the Schuyler are utility patents. 2 of them are design patents, which protect their keys from being reproduced by anyone else but Schuyler, so that when they're disseminating blanks for their locks, nobody else is allowed to disseminate those blanks. However, the Ilko Corporation went up against the best corporation, the California Supreme Court, and the California Supreme Court basically said, you can't do that. The Ilko are welcome to knock off as many of your cases you want. We don't think you should have a patent on that. And so far, it hasn't really been tested in a significant way against. We'll definitely still take out patents on their keys, but whether or not those patents are valid in American courts is really up for grabs. So, seeing on the horizon this patenting problem, a lot of European companies started actually taking out trademarks on their locks. They would actually take the pattern, cut into the plug, the pattern of the keyway, and they would trademark that. So we had the DU trademark on the one on the left, the SP on the lower left, and so on and so forth, so that the shape of that was a mark of the company, representing the company, and therefore it was protected by trademark. So if somebody attempted to reproduce a blank key for that, it would actually be infringing on their trademark, just like if you made a key that said Coca-Cola and tried to sell it to everybody. It's an interesting attempt, and we are yet to see a serious legal challenge. I should say that I'm not 100% up on current legal findings in this domain, but I at least have yet to see a serious legal challenge, but it is, a lot of people think, dubious at best whether or not it's pulled up. So then, really putting the nail in the coffin of patented keys, the French Patent Office came out and explicitly said, no, we will no longer be issuing patents to people that just have bare metal keys. You have to have some sort of interactive element, some moving element in the key itself. So, here we have multi-lock interactive, and other people have already been playing around with any moving elements. What goes on here is that this floating element in the key has to go into the lock flat and then be lifted up once inside of the lock to push an element above the plane of the key. And thus it becomes incredibly difficult to reproduce a key like this. And many of you may have recently seen some of the incredibly hyperbolic articles talking about 3D printed keys and how it's just destroying security, blah, 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 your lock is no longer safe. That's all well and good, except that for the past several decades we have had, the past couple of decades at least, we've had keys that can't be reproduced with a 3D printer. They can't be reproduced with a simple, mold of impression. These movable elements create a much bigger challenge. They're yet to be solved by something as simple as a 3D printer. Don't get me wrong, people are coming up with really creative solutions to potentially create these, but it is an incredibly high hurdle to climb if you're just trying to reproduce the key. Alright, big finish. This, I don't yet own, but would probably really challenge my herring hall. Well, sorry, I said there was a herring lock before. It's actually William Hall from Brookline, Massachusetts that invented that first remote anti-slam locks. Anyway, this here is the fichet. The fichet is amazing. Every component inside of the fichet is exactly the same as each other. So, you see 31, 31, 31, 31, 31. You see 44, 44, 44, 44, 44, so on and so forth. All of the tumblers in this are exactly the same as one another. All of the sidebar elements are exactly the same as one another. The way that this works and the way that the key has been patent protected is that Fichet said, okay, that's all well and good that the French Patent Office wants us to have a movable element to get a patent. We're a French-based security lock company, and we are cleverer than that. So what they did is they actually patented the key as part of the assembly process. Because this lock is coded the first time when a key is inserted into it, and all of those identical tumblers are turned to slightly different positions based on the shape of the key. And then the sidebars are attached to the tumblers, and the position that the sidebars are attached to the tumblers becomes the position that you receive the lock in, and is now coded to your key only, and the lock is able to be patented as part of that assembly process. Now, all of that said, Fichet did actually go through and create the Fichet 3D with movable element in it as well, but it was a really clever end run around that entire process. So this has been the talk. I'm going to put the thank you slide and then let that one see me off to dinner. But I did get, let's see if I have any questions. Interesting how software security mimics many concepts developed for locks. Intrusion detection, defense in depth, etc. Yeah, no, that is my bread and butter. It was the reason that people at various hacker conferences and corporate conferences asked me to come talk about locks, because there are incredible parallels in the development of physical security that apply directly to digital security. And those times when the two overlap with each other, like digital door locks that have to have mechanical elements inside of them, it tends to be a disaster. Really good to know mechanical security history as well. That was various looting, various lighting. Thank you for throwing that out. Jeff Popio asks, where did I get that watch? This I actually got at didn't know at the time that it was a salesman sample when I got it. I swear to God, when this arrived and I opened it, tears literally came into my eyes. When I first saw it, listen, knowing the whole lot and having seen one recently, largest sample auction ever in Denver, Pennsylvania, a couple of years ago, the photos of the traumatic rich. Saw one on the door, and I really did. I choked up when I saw that I could potentially, when it was actually in my hands, thanks to the salesman sample, tears literally came to my eyes. That's how crazy I am about this. And other people are just saying thank you. At least one person is saying, kids make me the person in Germany. I'm so sorry. I know you're not seeing me. I apologize for this. But I apologize on Twitter. That's lame. It doesn't work out there. And looks like that is it for now. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Oh, somebody's asking if I played around with 3D printing keys much. And do I think it's the future blocks? Great question. Super on point to be under the top. As a matter of fact, what you should do is check out the work that I did with Nirav Patel. It's Nirav Patel. And if you Google Nirav Patel and Schuyler Towne on the same query, you should find the work that we did on 3D printing ABIS Plus 8850 blocks, ABIS Plus profile disk container keys. And honestly, it actually opened up a whole new realm of exploration, semi-solid material, self-impression attacks against disk container locks, which I think are the future of protecting disk container locks, certainly. And do I think 3D printing is the future of locksmithing? Potentially. We're getting to the point of commoditization, and we see things like, without 3D printing yet, we have services like KeyMe and Keys Printed, and I feel so bad. The people that used to be Schuyler, who are awesome. I won't do too much for tracing comments in other internet forms. That can take a picture of your key and send you a copy of it. The same idea will apply with 3D printing. It's already starting to be applied with 3D printing. I love the idea of looking at it as a possible commoditized solution to some problems, more so than a super impressive attack vector, because the solutions to that as an attack vector already exist. Hopefully it means we'll start seeing more and more of the solutions rolled out in the real world and hit a more consumer price point. And certainly, it would be great if we just had threshold knowledge among consumers of these sorts of products to begin with. And maybe, in that regard only, high-quality performing goods. All right, looks like that's it for me for now. Thank you all so much at CleveSec. I really appreciate it. I'm at Shoebox on Twitter. Hope that this was informative, and of course this will be up for any of you joining late to view later on. Awesome. Thanks guys, want to keep breathing.
Alright, that was really awesome. Okay, I just have a few announcements to make before we take a short break for washrooms or setting up or getting a pizza or setting up here for the next speaker. So let me see here. Not much going on this month. If anyone here wants to make an announcement, you're welcome to do so. But we are just looking for more feedback on the forum, on the discussions in the meetup. We currently have a poll going on about the IC Squared has a meeting apparently on the same day and times as our community nights. So we're seeing, should we change our community nights or should we just keep it the same? You can place your vote there. And we have some ideas rolling on the discussions for other community nights and for projects that will benefit the community, things like that. So go on and check it out and spread the word about those. So let's take a quick break, grab some more food. Like I said, there's drinks upstairs. I can show you if you're thirsty. And we'll have Jeff set up for the next talk. Yeah. Okay, good to go.
Are you good?
Yeah.
All right.
Whenever you're ready.
So, I'm Jeff Popio. I'm not Schuyler Towne. I can honestly tell you that Schuyler has forgotten more about locks than I probably will ever know. But that's not fair because he probably hasn't forgotten anything. But very impressive. Kind of I guess how we can tie these two talks together is that what I'm about to show you is that even though Tyler and others have done a meticulous job of demonstrating all of the flaws and the mistakes that we've made over the last 4,000 years, people who are making brand new things for consumers and some commercial products have not learned anything. So here we go, electronic safe fail. Common vulnerabilities in electronic safes. So I'm an InfoSec guy. I work for a lawn and garden company in Central Ohio. Nothing special about me. Father, I've got a daughter who's 4 and a son who's 1. It's not fun, but I don't do this for a living. I do this for fun. I'm into lock sport for 4 years. Do Lock Sport International, but we know lots of other folks. So I do like to avoid warranties. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about non-destructive covert entry of electronic safes. So we're not going to cut anything open. We're not going to hit it with a sledgehammer because, well, those are very effective ways of opening safes. It's also a very, particular way they rate commercial safes and how difficult it is. For our purposes, we're dealing with sub $1,000 safes, so I'm going to just set aside if you're willing to hit bang on it with a 5-pound sledgehammer for 10 minutes, you're going to get into all these safes. Not a problem. So why do we do this talk? Because these safes are everywhere. These are the #1 selling safes on Amazon. They are what most of us have in our homes to lock things up. It's, just read it. Oh, this is a great Christmas gift for my daughter and son who don't like to use banks to save their money. What is this? It's just perfect. People have complete misconception of what these can actually secure and what they actually do. These things are no more than lock boxes. I mean, they're in essence, they're trying to pass the 12-year-old test. Like, if you left your 12-year-old son or daughter at home while you were away for a weekend, your goal was to be able to keep them out, right? And assuming they don't have any training in lock sport, that's kind of the level that these devices are actually built for. But people rely on them as though they are a bank vault. So, what motivated this talk? So I'm working as I have this client, and he says, hey, we're going to store this sensitive material, certificate authority, offline root, or backup tape, or whatever we use in InfoSec. We want to keep safe. And he's like, oh, I'm going to put this in we got this secured room, it's got badge access, so that's going to keep people out, because that's impossible to clone a badge. And, we'll put it in there and it'll keep all of our stuff safe, because, we're going to rely on the certificate root to do everything, so we cannot lose this. So this offline root's going to stay here, it's going to be great. Okay, good. Okay, and he's like, well, I got this safe to put in. It's like, well, I could recommend something, it'd be like $20,000, and he's like, no, we don't have that kind of budget. So we're like, we're thinking like, under $1,000. So he's like, well, I bought this safe. I'm like, oh, that's great, but I don't think that's going to be very good. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I think I can open it. And he's like, no, you can't. He's like, there's no batteries in it. Like, the key's in my office. Like, it's not even set up. You can't open it. And I'm like, well, let me try. And then this happens. Oh. Yeah. Oh, oops. Let's do it with sound this time. There we go. Yeah. So, not so good, right? Like, you're gonna rely on that and to be fair, like, look at it. It is heavy. It's big. It's it's metal. It's what you want, generally speaking, when people think of safe. Why does that work? Well, it works because the electronic mechanism obviously is lacking. It can be manipulated. And particularly in this case, the safe's not bolted down, right? Like I have to rock the safe back and forth in order to do that. And if it was bolted down, that would not necessarily eliminate the possibility of that type of attack, but it certainly makes it much more difficult. So yeah, this works. Why does this work? Because this locking mechanism and almost all locking mechanisms in the sub $1,000 category use a solenoid where you have this pin, you enter your key code. Oh, I think the next slide I'll show you. You enter your key code. This is that the same type of pin. Beep, 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 code. Pin drops down. You can open the door. Okay, pretty common. That's pretty much the essence of most of the arguments. It's simple, it is effective. I think that's what the engineers who make this like about it, is that, you know, it kind of swallows. The mistake here is, from a functional standpoint, the mistake here is that that pin moves freely. It's held up by a spring. So if we can somehow lower that pin, we can open the safe. So as in the first safe, if we drop the safe, we can rock it and drop it, that pin, the inertia of the pin carries it down. We turn, with a well-timed turn of the handle, we can catch it while the pin's at the very bottom and open the safe. This works on all of these safes in one way or another. And for that matter, pretty much all these safes under $1,000. There are some good ones, some improvements, but generally speaking, if it's electronic only, this is the kind of mechanism or some variation of this mechanism that's used. So, what else is wrong? So, we bolt it down. We're good, right? Like, that's it. There's no problem. Well, there's openings, right? We got to get at that pin. If there's openings in the front, you have to put some openings somewhere because you have to allow cables to the keypad. You have to allow cables to batteries if you're going to store them outside. You, in some cases, will drill a hole through the door to put a screw in because that's a good idea. All these things happen. There are mistakes, flaws that are in these kinds of safes. So he says, oh, no problem. We bolt it down. You know, that's fine. We bolt it down. You're not going to be able to open it. It's all good. So I'm like, well, give me a shot. I spent about 2 minutes, bend up a metal file folder, and you can just, look, they put a little keyhole in there to give you access for a key override. And I just reach in there with the file folder, find that pin. You need to do this faster, Jeff. Struggle with finding the pin. Again, I realize this is not practiced or rehearsed. This is just a guy giving me the nail. So, wow. Wouldn't that be disappointing if you spent like $1,000 on that? Like, that would suck. So, like I said, cabling needs a hole. You know, if holes are placed poorly, they give you access to the pin, then we can easily manipulate that pin to open the safe. So, let's look at this safe. I bought this safe. This is a Century Safe G1459E. Actually, the first safe I ever bought personally. Was really highly rated on Amazon. I was like, hey, let's do this. Like, got kids. I want to keep my kids away from some guns. Like, it's perfect, right? It's exactly what I want. Pass the 12-year-old, 13-year-old test. Sweet. So I buy it, and I'm like, you know, because I'm an InfoSec guy, what the first thing I do? I open the box and I take the door off. Like, how does this thing work? And there's a problem. Gigantic problem. You can remove keypad. You can remove the top right screw hole, which ironically goes all the way through the door because that's a good idea. Take the coat hanger. Pin is 2 inches from that hole. Press on the pin and open the safe. So, yeah, I did spend, well, not $1,000, but a lot of money on that safe. And yeah, it's like, hey, yeah, you can return it through Amazon. All you gotta do is pay $600 to ship it back. So yeah, not a great scenario. So I was like, well, all right, I'll contact SentrySafe and be like, hey, what do we do here? Like, you know, this is really bad. So, now this is an inside view. I'll skip this because I think you can imagine what's going to happen here. We're going to reach in with the coat hanger, hit the pin. Hurry up. Look, we find the pin, we push it down. And we turn it. Hey, look. So, I contacted them and they're like, hey, after about 2 or 3 phone calls, kind of like starting with like customer service and working my way to like engineering, I get a hold of this guy and he's like, oh, I understand what you're talking about. Like, yeah, there's a hole there. That's not good. Yeah, we agree. That's bad. So, I'll tell you what. I think me and my guys, we're gonna work up something. We're gonna get a fix out to you and ship it out. And I'm thinking like they're gonna have like a replacement mechanism for the whole center section, like this whole thing. And they send me this. It's this like bent piece of metal. I'm like, well, okay. I don't know how that's gonna fix this like crappy pin mechanism, but okay, let's just see what happens. It's like, oh, hey, look, there you go. You see, you remove that screw and you put that on. It covers up the hole, so clearly it's all fixed, right? Because there's no other place to access that pin. Like, I don't know, this hole or that hole or any of the other places you could get at it. Well, okay, sure. So, yeah, that's not so good. So I ended up making a fix to shield the pin based on access. And sadly, if you own one of these safes, like, you know, you're welcome to try and contact the vendor and like ask them to fix it, and they might come up with something like a bent piece of metal, but ultimately they're not going to recall 10,200-pound safes. So, you know, you probably will end up doing something like this if you're trying to make it more secure. So, right, it's all good, right? We covered up that pin. So, yes, the button. So, a lot of electronic safes have they use a mechanism where, in order to set the code for the safe, you basically have to prove that you can open it, right? So once you're inside, they put a button on the inside of the safe. So you've opened the safe now with either an override key or the original combination or a factory combination, and you can press this button and then set the code to whatever you want to be. Well, that's great, except a lot of times you can get access to this button because they place it in the door jamb or someplace relatively easily accessible with a piece of shim material, like a bent piece of metal or a piece of spring steel, windshield wiper blade, whatever. Very easily improvised. So you hit that button, it beeps, you set the code, whatever you want, and you can open the safe. This red button, wow, I mean, let me tell you, whatever this button is, it must be like the cheapest button you can possibly buy because every one of these safes seems to have the same red button. It's amazing. And they all seem to be placed in just the dumbest places. I've seen some that are getting better where they place it on the back of the door and it's recessed on the inside, so it actually would be fairly difficult to get to. But the button, a lot of mistakes with the button. And we'll see this in some of the safes we have here. So, let's get access to it. We take this piece of metal. This is so hard. This is the spring steel on a windshield wiper blade, and it's pretty hard. So, like, reach in there, find the button. It's kind of hard to turn because I don't have a lot of leverage. I should have put another bend in that. Oh, beep. Let's make it 333. Sweet. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Now we open the safe. So that's bad. That's common. That G1459 also has the same problem.
Are you physically depressing the button, or are you shorting the terminals out on the back side?
I'm just pressing the button. And there are, you bring up an excellent point, like if you can get access to the door and figure out a way to short the terminals, you also can do this. So equally as effective. And there's kind of another point there. So, you know, hey, right? Since we got this awesome locking mechanism with our reset button, let's supplement that locking mechanism with a key override. And what we'll use for that key override, well, we'll use a wafer lock. And if you are familiar with Locksport, a wafer lock is, let's put it this way, there are some good wafer locks, or should I say there are some decent wafer locks, but the locks on these are terrible. So I'm honestly a fairly terrible lock picker, but even I can pick a crappy wafer lock. So, oh look, there's a key override under the handle. This is not like anything magical. I have a tensioner, and pretty much like any straight piece of metal, put it in the right side of the object. And the method, shake it to open a wafer lock. Vibrate the lock, and you're basically, again, using and voila, that opens. So, great. So now we can, a lot of these locks, a lot of these safes also have a key override, which are protected either by usually a low-grade lock. Now, in a lot of cases, you can replace these. So if you have one of these safes, you may have to do a little research on getting appropriate. You can get a much better lock to be placed on it than this crappy wafer lock. Now, I'm not saying you're going to make it. Again, look, you're talking with a quarter-inch piece of steel. Like, we're not talking about bank ball here, but you can make it so that like I can teach my 4-year-old how to do that. So you can make it so that at least my 4-year-old probably can't get into it. But there are other flaws, right? There's other problems with these safes. Like, so in the case of Century Safe, if you have access to the serial number, you effectively can get access to the safe. So they have a mechanism whereby if you buy a Century Safe or you forget your code, like I can't remember what the code is, or my husband knew it and he died or whatever, you need to get the code, you want to get it safe. You can call Century Safe and they'll go, okay, no problem, just fill out this form on our website. I'll actually print out this PDF and you fill out all this information about who you are and where you live and all that fun stuff. And then you put on there like where you want us to send this information. And then you give me a serial number and a model number to the safe. And they keep a record of this back at the factory of like a factory code or, to get into the safe. And it's like burned in the prompt, can't change it. It's great, so awesome. And you basically take it to a notary and then send it to us. And then we'll send you the stuff. So important to not leave your serial number on the outside of the safe, just for the case where you have that kind of reset mechanism, because a notary is an excellent authentication mechanism. But that's it. So you own one of these safes. What do you do? Well, contact the safe vendor, duct tape and baling wire. Sadly, it is actually very effective. In the case of the first safe we dropped, after I opened it with the coat hanger or whatever, the bent file folder, the guy I was talking to basically was like, hey, well, I'm going to fix it. Okay, so he gets it bolted to the floor, puts it behind the keypad. He's like, I'm not even going to put the batteries in the keypad so you can even attack that. So what he did was he took a bunch of like packing material, like scrunchy paper kind of stuff, and then just shoved it inside the door. And it doesn't how to put it? It's kind of like putting serrated pins on a lock, right? It doesn't make it so that you can't do it, but it makes it take a lot longer because you put it in there and you're like, oh man, I can't get in there. And it was like, even stuff like that, like while it sounds ridiculous, if someone's actually, trying to covertly open your safe, like a kid or whatever, that's going to buy you time. And that's kind of what these do. The safe buys you time. Like if you have a safe and it's in the most secluded place in the world and you have all unlimited time to get access, it's not a safe, it's a delay, right? That's all it serves, the only purpose it serves. So if you put it in say an office building and you have a security guard and an alarm, now you've got something. Now you're creating that defense in depth as layers. But this layer, particularly in the inexpensive safe, very, very poor. Or can be if we don't take precautions. So Century Safe. So I was like, oh, I was going to do this talk at DerbyCon last year, and I was like, yeah, I want to show, like I want to see like what's their latest, greatest thing. I want to show off like, how, have they done anything? Well, it turns out they did some things to improve since the, when I bought the 1459. I was like, hey, they've got these fire safes now, and they've changed the angle of the pin. So now instead of it being vertical, where you can just drop, it faces forward. So now you have to drop it onto the keypad, right, in order to open it. And they've changed the shape of the pin, so the pin is now a spool shape. So one of the things you can do, like if say the safe has a strong solenoid where the spring is very tight, you can slightly tension the handle, drop it, and then that will hold it down in place. Drop it again, drop it again, drop it again until you can open it. But spool shape, man, that makes it harder because now, you can't do that iterative process. Now you have to time it just right when it hits the very bottom. So, right, that's a lot better. I'm like, man, what am I gonna do here? I don't know. Well, it's fixed, right? Well, no. I think I can demo it, but I want to preface that with I need a safe place to retain client documents. I've always rented a bank safe deposit box. These boxes are increasingly harder to find because customers keep them for years and years, and banks don't typically have many. With some branches have no boxes, this safe provided me with a wonderful solution. The documents are safe and more easily accessible. Well, that's so true. The safe, while quite heavy, is very easy to set up. I should have gone this route before. So, wow, wonderful, right? So we can do this if you want. We can demo all this, but basically what we have here is an N50 neodymium magnet. I'm going to basically show you the safe actually worked before we place the neodymium magnet on the front of the safe, right where the solenoid is. The book is strictly there for the preservation of the keypad. Drop it. The magnet holds the pin in the down position. So hey, great. That was a fun little demo. So I put together a little finale, basically bumping all of these safes. Again, we're going to do that because this stuff's fun. But it's like they're all vulnerable to this bump. If they're not bolted down, it's really bad. Like oh, okay, now they got access to your gun. And we put it on top of the dresser, so that way the kids can except it's open. Oh, this one's heavy, so it's kind of. This is terrible effort here. Dramatic pause. That works. Okay. And they all open. So, bolt down the safe. It's important. Obviously, if you're going to buy one of these, you want to, if you can go to a Walmart or a Cabela's or whatever and, take the door off and look at them, that's good, right? Folks, they want to show you, oh, look how strong the hinges are, and look how all this stuff, and it's like that. This is all, look how big the bolts are that hold the thing. It's like, yeah, that's not the problem. So, what you really want to do, I've gone in and just said, hey, is it okay if I just take this door off? I'll put it back. But some places are cool, and some places are like, no, you're going to break it down. So I would recommend only buying something you can take apart before you buy it. So keep it short. We're all going to come up here. I'll show you how to bump a couple safes. For that matter, I've got some shim material. We can shim a couple buttons if you'd like. I want to give credit to all these wonderful people. They have done way more for the lock sport and for information security than I may ever do, but